You can't always tell if a river is healthy just by looking at it. The water might look clear, but what's really going on beneath the surface? Well, it turns out there are thousands of tiny detectives living in there, witnesses who see what's happening 24/7. Today, we're going to see how these little river bugs can reveal the secret health of our freshwater ecosystems. So that's the big question, right? How on earth can something as small as an insect larva tell a really complex story about pollution, oxygen levels, and the entire state of a river? Well, let's dive in and find out. To really get a good health check on a river, we've got to go way beyond just what we can see from the bank. We're going to put on our ecological investigator hats and start gathering clues to piece together the whole story. And for this investigation, we're heading to a real-world location, the Owena River in Nigeria. Now, this river is a super important water source for the people there, but it's also under a lot of pressure from things like farming and waste. That makes it the absolute perfect place to see our little biodetectives in action. Okay, so traditionally, a scientist might just grab a single vial of water for a chemical test. But think about it. That's just a snapshot, a single moment in time. A pollutant might have washed through yesterday and be gone today. Biomonitoring, on the other hand, using the insects that actually live in the river, well, that's like watching the entire movie. It gives us the long-term story of the river's health, because those bugs are there through it all. So let's meet our key witnesses. And these aren't just any bugs. Nope, they are highly specialized bioindicators. They're nature's own little data collectors, and their very presence, or maybe more importantly, their absence, is a huge piece of the puzzle. To put it simply, a bioindicator is basically a living clue. See, different insects have totally different levels of tolerance to pollution. Some are super sensitive, and others are tough as nails. So just by seeing who's there and who's not, we can figure out what's really going on in the water. First up, you've got the superstars of clean water. We call them the EPT group. This is shorthand for mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. These guys are the real divas of the river. They're extremely sensitive to pollution. So if you find a whole bunch of them, that's a fantastic sign. They are the classic canaries in the coal mine for a river ecosystem. Now, on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have the tough survivors. These include certain kinds of true flies, especially from the midge family. These little guys are incredibly tolerant of pollution. They can hang on in some pretty nasty conditions. So if a river is just packed with them and not much else, that's a major red flag that the ecosystem is in trouble. So we know who we're looking for, but how do biologists actually go out and collect this evidence? Well, this is where the real boots-in-the-mud fieldwork comes in. It's a very systematic process to make sure they get a really good representative sample of all the insects living there. And it's a pretty meticulous job. Okay, first up, biologists use what's called a dip net, and they sweep it through everything. Sand, gravel, plants, you name it. Then, all that stuff gets dumped into a sorting bucket. They carefully check the net for any little critters still hanging on. After that, the samples get preserved in ethanol and carefully labeled. And finally, it's back to the lab, where each and every insect is identified under a microscope, usually down to the family level. All right, so we've got our buckets of bugs, all identified. Now what? The next step is to turn all that biological data into a simple, easy-to-understand health score for the river. It's time to crack the code. And we do that using something called a biotic index. It's a really clever system, actually. Each family of insects is given a score based on how tolerant it is to pollution. So by adding up the scores of all the different families we found, we can calculate an overall health grade for the river. So let's look at how we actually read these scores. A couple of common ones are the BMWP and the ASPT. For these, it's pretty simple. A higher score means cleaner water. The ASPT is kind of like a refined version that calculates an average, which makes it easier to compare different spots. You can see right here that an ASPT score above 5.4 is considered excellent. But wait, there are other tools in the toolbox, like the Family Biotic Index, or FBI. Now, this one's a little different. It's specifically designed to sniff out organic pollution. And here's the key thing to remember. With the FBI, a lower score is better. A score close to 0 means the water is pristine. A score up over 5, though, that suggests there's some pretty substantial pollution going on. It gives us a totally different angle to look at. Okay, we've got our methods, we've got our scoring systems. It is time to bring it all together and see what the verdict is for our case study, the Owena River. What did the little biodetectives actually find? And this is where the story gets really, really interesting. The results are kind of mixed. Look at this. The BMWP score says regular quality, but the ASPT score comes in at excellent. And then the FBI score points to fair quality with a good chance of organic pollution. Now, this isn't a contradiction. It's actually a really detailed diagnosis. It tells us that the river's general health is pretty good, but it's definitely showing signs of stress from a specific kind of pollution. This chart of the whole insect community really drives that point home. See that? Only about 14% of the bugs they found were the super sensitive types. The vast majority, over 73%, were from families that are only moderately sensitive. This totally backs up the idea of an ecosystem that's, it's hanging in there, but it is definitely feeling the pressure from human activity. So what's the final word from the biologists who did the study? Well, they classify the Owena River as moderately impaired. What that means is the river still has some fight in it, some resilience. But there's also clear as day evidence of human-caused stress. The insects have told their story, and it's a complicated one. So why does all of this matter? Because this whole method, using the life that's already in the river to check its pulse, is not only reliable, it's incredibly cost-effective. You don't need a ton of fancy lab equipment for protecting vital, vulnerable ecosystems all over the world, especially in developing regions. This is an absolutely powerful tool for conservation. And that really leaves us with one final thought. We've just heard the story of the Owena River, a story written by the tiny insects that call it home. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What story are the tiny biodetectives in your local river trying to tell?